Welcome back to the NerdNest podcast. It's me, Bill. Then we've got Carrie, we've got Russ. Rich and Kyle are busy doing stuff today, so we're what you get, and we're all wearing red. Russ noticed as soon as he hopped in. This was not pre-planned, but I think, I don't know, maybe we'll make it a thing. Carrie, you just got back from Italy. You happy to be back? You happy to get back to work?
So yes, I am happy to be back, but they're getting a hold of all the amount of work that I have to do is proving challenging at the current moment. It's overwhelming, to say the least.
Well, he still made time for us. Russ, what's going on, man? How's it going?
Good. I went on a little bit of travel too. I went to Las Vegas about 2 weekends ago now, and still trying to catch up. It's funny how just 4 days away from my usual schedule can disrupt things so much, but I'm getting back into the swing of things.
Awesome. Well, we have got a lot of stuff to cover. I was going through the news sites this morning and just kind of finding stuff. And there's some stuff that I kind of want to bring back from a couple of weeks ago because I knew that Carrie had strong opinions about some stuff. So we definitely are going to, he's going to talk about Xbox handhelds a little bit. But we've got SteamOS stuff. We've got, are you gaming on your phone? We've got Xbox leaks coming out of everywhere. So there's a lot for us to talk about, but I figured that we would start off with, I want to talk about, everybody seems to want to be the Steam Deck right now. There's lots and lots of handhelds coming out of the woodwork. And, Microsoft had these big leaks. And in those big leaks, there's some information about a handheld. Now, Carrie has been talking about handhelds from Microsoft for a long time. He's got a really good video about the Series S could possibly be the handheld from Microsoft. Carrie, you tweeted that this is, you got to read between the lines. I could not tell if you were being sarcastic or not.
All right, so there's lots of ways to look at this, right? You could just look at it what's on face value based on those documents. First off, those documents are very old. Mm-hmm. So those were from 2020, not current. The other part of there is that when they had listed handhelds, they actually put in another slide that handhelds was not going to be a first-party thing, which kind of shoots down the entire argument that Microsoft is going to be making a handheld. However, it is completely possible that they can. The only thing that I think would shoot a hole in is that my initial assumption when I had first made an opinion that the Series S was going to be a decision for things to come was something I had said in 2020 myself. So that is the only part which doesn't align where that Microsoft clearly wasn't looking at a handheld for the Series S, even though they have some arbitrary decisions there. Later on, I think what was determined, I think this came from Jez Corden, from Windows Central. He told me that the Windows S profile was actually created so that they had a target for the cloud. So that they could basically run Series S games on the cloud so that they can have multiple instances on bigger hardware and then serve many customers on, per unit of hardware that they have in the cloud. So that makes sense.
I just want to interrupt just real quick. That's very interesting to me. So you're saying you have a server blade that is essentially an Xbox Series X, but if you're playing lower power games that don't really require the full capabilities of a Series X, then they could segment those off and say, all right, well, I'm going to send a stream to Carrie, I'm going to send a stream to Bill, and I'm going to send a stream to Russ, and those guys are all playing on the same machine. Is that what you were saying?
That is what they do. They segment off, they virtually slice off the hardware per unit. So if the GPU that they have is super powerful, they'll slice it up 4 ways to make 4 Series S's. And one machine will do 4 Series S's. So that's what they're doing currently. And that kind of explains why we've seen that artificial limitation that they put on the system, because it really makes no sense for something that is to be powered off of a wall to use so little power. Then there's other arguments that was said that, especially this is something that Digital Foundry has said, is that the Series S was originally supposed to be the 2020 model and the Series X was going to be the mid-gen refresh. But they came out with the Series X and the Series S at the same time, which is why we're seeing that Series X digital version that isn't an upgrade. It just has no disc.
So I think there's a storage upgrade there, right?
storage upgrade as well, but nothing. There is no mid-gen ref. There's no Pro
Right.
model, right? It's basically the same thing. So instead of having a PS5 and then a PS5 Pro later, Microsoft basically did both at the same time, and let people choose whichever one they wanted to do. That's what is being conveyed by Digital Foundry. In any event, no matter which way you slice this up, the Series S profile is a target for a handheld as well. Can we get there by next year? I'm of the belief that we can. They just have to do it in certain ways. And I think Microsoft has the entire stack and competency to do it. If they do it, that's one thing. However, if we're going to say we're reading between the lines, where I'll still put on my tinfoil hat, if you were to take a look at the TGS video, this is actually, like, I'm going to say it, like, it's almost verbatim what Phil Spencer said. He's like, I really admire Japanese games. If you take a look at the Game Boy, the PSP, the Nintendo Switch, that's what he said, word for word. Like, put them all. Well, he said, literally just talking about handheld. So if you read between the lines, he's saying they're doing something with handhelds. Anyway, that's what my brain is going through. But I'm, to be honest, I have come to think that it might not happen, even though they should. At the very least, I think that they should entertain a 2028 handheld, which is so far away. And I think it's a wrong decision, in my personal opinion. Again, these were old documents for 2020, right? And in 2023, they have evidence that Japan loves the Steam Deck. And that was the opener for TGS, right? Like, Pierre-Loup is there talking about it. So they have information right at their hand. They're like, oh, if we want to have a bigger footprint in Japan, we need to make a handheld.
Do you,
I don't know.
do you think that there's a possibility that he's saying that because he knows that he's standing in front of an audience where home consoles and home PCs are typically not nearly as popular there as they are here and other places? Handhelds are way more popular, so like he's just talking to that audience and saying, these are the things that you guys like, and we understand that, we respect that.
Yeah, it's possible. Go ahead.
I think it's the opposite. I think that he didn't want to provide a sound, and I'm just playing devil's advocate because I kind of hope that he is thinking about a handheld.
Same.
But devil's advocate is that he didn't want to have a soundbite where he praised another home console, because that's an actual competition. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't want to say, oh yeah, the Nintendo Wii was great or whatever, or I love the Switch, because it's not like they don't actually say it's a competition. It's more Sony versus Microsoft, obviously. But that's what I feel like, is that he didn't want to fan the flames of fanboyism, which is probably something they think about all the time. And so that's why he probably specifically said handheld consoles, because they don't really have a competition with that, at least right now.
That's interesting. What do you think about that, Carrie?
I think he was talking to me specifically.
He's like looking at that tweet and he's like, boy, this guy, we got to talk to that guy. Listen, Carrie, here, this is for you. That's awesome.
I gotta talk to him in code. He'll understand.
He'll understand.
That's exactly how
only
like
you
crazy
would
people
understand.
think. Oh my gosh.
That's awesome. So, Russ, what do you think? Do you think that? Do you feel like? Yeah, it's old stuff. That they, when they posted this, or when they made this thing 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, the Nintendo Switch was out, but that was it for handhelds. Yeah, I know that there were other companies making handhelds, but they weren't like, they don't have the what's the word I'm looking for, where people pay attention to something. Nobody was paying attention to it. I don't know what I'm trying to think of.
Mindshare?
Spotlight?
Mindshare, Spotlight, sure. The Mindshare is really what I was thinking. Those other things don't have the Mindshare like the Nintendo Switch does. And then in comes Valve, and you can't go to a gaming website without seeing a Steam Deck article. So do you think things have changed since then?
Yeah, I think that they're definitely talking about it behind closed doors. You know what I mean? Like, it would be ridiculous to think that they're not considering something like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to tell what Microsoft's going to actually do, because they are a very slow moving beast. It reminds me a lot of my time in the military, and just kind of how plans start, and even by the time they're executed, sometimes they're already obsolete, but you can't stop that train because it's already rolling, And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they can pivot so quickly like that. I think that them aligning themselves to other handheld releases is a good idea right now. But yeah, I would love it if they're like, and now here's ours. After we've learned all these other things from these other product launches, here's ours. But yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, I thought like I made that point in one of my videos where I was talking about that Microsoft get all this R&D for free. You know, they got this company and this company and this company all doing R&D for these devices, and they're running Windows, and Microsoft gets to just sit back and watch and say, people think that's cool. Nobody cares about that. People think that's cool. And like they're sitting there with a notepad writing down all the things that everybody likes, and then maybe they, come out swinging with something cool. I said that in my video, and somebody said that's the Android model, where Google said, here's this operating system, anybody can use whatever, go ahead, make your stuff. And then they paid attention to what everybody was doing, and they were like, okay, now we're going to make the Google phone or whatever it's called. I can't remember. So like, Carrie, do you think that, I know that you're always kind of like, you have a lot of hopium for this. Do you think that Microsoft has changed their mind since then?
I do. I mean, I've come to grips with that they were not thinking about it initially, and they were just looking at it from a cloud sense. However, I think that with all of the work and determination that they've made with having a Series S profile, to the chagrin of everybody, everyone is like, Series S is holding back this generation. You have devs that are claiming to complain about it. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have split screen on it. All of these things that people point at and laugh at. So it is baggage for them. However, it's a fantastic runway for a handheld. So for a device that doesn't need to just like, oh, I'm running at whatever this is, and this is easier for me to run at. So it's like they've got all of this for them, and I think that they have to be very aware of that. Looking at the Steam Deck, looking at the ROG Ally, looking at the Lenovo Legion Go, I personally don't think that they're looking at those handhelds and go, oh yeah, those are Game Pass subscribers. I don't think that at all. When people are buying those things, I don't think that many people are going into them getting it for Game Pass. Maybe there's a fraction, there's a percentage. I don't think it's a large percentage. For me, a device that is an Xbox-centric thing makes a lot more sense. Also, we don't have on the PC landscape Microsoft's own emulator, which their emulator is ridiculously good. So if you wanted to play a bunch of 360 games that you could then play on a handheld, you can't use Microsoft's emulator unless it's on Xbox. So an Xbox handheld that is also going to be able to play 360 games, that has a lot of value. So for me, it's just about the ecosystem. And it's like when people, for me, I grew up, when I wanted to play Wing Commander in 1990, when I got a Sound Blaster, I installed it. No one else helped me. I had to install the whole thing, worry about IRQ ports as an 8-year-old, right? And like that was an experience that a lot of people were just like, oh my God, I can't think about this. I just want a console. And I kind of just accepted it and was like, oh, okay, well, if I want the best, I have to, endure this. And that helped me figure out how a lot of things were done. I do think that the common perception of PC gaming remains the same. For a lot of people, it's pain. And the Steam Deck has come a long way with SteamOS to make that entire experience smoother. And this is something that I said even day one. I was like, as plain as day for me, and people were looking at it a lot of different angles. But what Valve has been doing is making SteamOS take away all the barriers of playing on PC and giving you those trackpads, giving you everything to translate all of those inputs into something that fits into a handheld for a myriad of different PC games. And I don't think that when people are looking at the Asus ROG Ally or the Lenovo Legion Go, they're going to be going in with one mindset and get disappointed almost immediately with what they have to endure. Because what they want is they want a Steam Deck experience. They want a console experience. And that is why I still think an Xbox handheld itself is what people actually want. Like, if you think about, like, volume numbers, right? That an Xbox handheld will outsell the Asus ROG Ally. It'll outsell the Lenovo Legion Go. It'll outsell the Steam Deck. Mm-hmm. But if Microsoft came out with a PC gaming handheld, it wouldn't sell. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, in that there is value, intrinsic value of a console handheld. The idea that it is a console is going to be playing console games on a handheld. So for me, they have everything they need to do. They should just do it. And I think that there's enough around them to give them that information. It remains to be seen if they do it or not.
Man, I was just thinking
go
that
ahead.
if they do this, it's going to make the PS Portal look so dumb.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're like, look at what Sony did. They have something that can just beam it over to you. You know what I mean? Whereas here is just an Xbox, you know? And it'd be great if they just put the controllers and have the screen on there or whatever, you know what I mean? And just, yeah, that thought kind of hit me right then. It'd be funny.
It would, and you're talking to at least 2 people that bought that stupid thing. Although I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. So let's move on and talk about the controllers, because they got this new controller. My biggest gripe with Xbox controllers, I think they're great. I think they're really good controllers, but they don't have gyro, and this new one has not gyro but accelerometers. And somebody in my comment section said, I think that's for the raise to wake, and I was like, that's a terrible idea. Like, the idea, like, raise to wake in a controller that's all kinds of dumb. Like, that's going to turn on people's Xboxes all the time. You know, I walk by, I bump into a table, or my cat gets on the thing, and like, that's a bad idea. But they still are avoiding gyroscopes when everybody else has gyroscopes. But the thing is that no game devs, I don't want to say no game devs, but few game devs utilize the gyroscopes in controllers because Xbox won't embrace it. And that drives me absolutely crazy. The second thing about this controller, and then I'm going to ask you guys a question. The second thing about the controller is that it has a direct to the cloud connection. And I think that's huge for xCloud. I forgot what it was called there for a second. I think that's huge for xCloud because my camera just turned off. I don't know why my camera turned off. We will find out about that, but I'm just going to keep talking. It's so distracting that my camera's not working. What was I saying? The cloud controller reduces latency by a ridiculous amount. When I was using Google Stadia, that was the one that felt the most instantaneous with the smallest amount of lag. And everything else felt like it was kind of laggy compared to Stadia because their controllers connected directly to the Stadia servers. And that's what these controllers are going to do. Carrie, what do you think about that as the features of this new controller? And while you tell Russ what you think, I'm going to try and fix my camera.
There's a bunch to talk about there. Accelerometer only, it would be a huge disappointment because it's not enough data. The gyro part of it, the gravity side of it, is actually needed for being able to do motion. Accelerometer only is weird in a lot of ways. I don't know if you can hear us, Bill, but your video's back on. And then the direct to cloud thing, that's a really interesting idea. I was unaware that Stadia controllers actually did that, where they would bypass where they're sending so that you weren't sending inputs to the host, and then the host is then sending it to out through the gateway into the other actual host. Yeah. So if it's bypassing that, that's actually really wild. So ultimately, I think for me, the big thing here would be the Xbox X Input API and what changes are being made there. And when that happens, as a quick side note, every PC gaming handheld that comes from like GBD or INEO or whatever, they're actually still using Xbox 360 controller chips. So X Input is limited to 360. They do actually have Xbox One controller chips. They just don't use them. And it was initially because of supply, but then there wasn't enough there that they actually warranted getting it because there was a cost increase. So from a handheld perspective, from like how we would think about it, if insofar as accelerometers and if gyro were to actually enter into X Input, all of these companies would need to start using newer chipsets that actually supported the latest series controller. because there's Xbox 360 controllers, there's Xbox One controllers, and this would be Series. So that would be pretty cool if we actually got full gyro. Accelerometer only is a miss.
I agree that it's, I interviewed John Justice, who is a senior VP at Google back when Stadia was just coming out. And I asked him, I said, hey, how come you're not putting gyroscopes in your controllers? And he said, we feel like people don't want that. But I wonder if it had anything to do with latency. Like maybe it makes it easier to feel the latency between you and the server when you are talking about a cloud platform. When you're using gyroscope, and you don't really feel it nearly as much with sticks. Like when I played when I played GeForce Now and I use a controller, I don't feel the latency very much. But when I use a mouse and keyboard, I can feel it a little bit more. And they've definitely improved now that they have their super pods or whatever they're called that go like 240 frames per second or whatever. I can't take advantage of that because I don't have a screen for it. But I wonder if that's the reason. Russ, do you care about cloud gaming at all? Is this something that you're interested in?
Yeah, I like cloud gaming. I don't use it as much just because of my location in Hawaii, because everything's terrible. Yeah. Like Stadia was completely unplayable for me. There were snippets of moments where I could actually use it, but yeah, it's still rough. There's no Google service here to accommodate that. Xbox streaming and Microsoft streaming is better, but it's still not something that I enjoy. Like I went. Christmas time, I went to California and I hung out with a friend, and we were playing a game on cloud because we were waiting for it to download on his Xbox. So we're like, oh, let's just play it on cloud, and I could not tell a difference, and it was amazing. I was like, oh, this is what people actually experience, So it is something in concept I would probably use all the time if I didn't live here in Hawaii.
Yeah. So the thing is like, but then you have. I never ran into this on Stadia. I never once saw a line. But that might be because it just wasn't very successful. I didn't have room on my Xbox, so I was going to cloud stream Starfield. And I don't know if you guys saw the tweet when I had posted it, but I had to wait 114 minutes for the queue because all the people in front of me were like, that's something that you got to worry about when you're talking about cloud gaming. I don't run into that on GeForce Now because I have like the higher tier membership or whatever. But I did run into that on xCloud, and that was really frustrating. And I ended up just shutting the game off and not even bothering because I couldn't play right then. So I missed it, Fox. Did you say that you do any cloud gaming or no?
So yeah, I mean, I do often. I usually play it on just the handhelds because it's just more convenient for me, as opposed to playing cloud on my PC or in living room. I never do. It's pretty much a handheld only thing. Insofar as when I talk about that as well, like I've also often called it console companions. So I always look at it from the cost. Like I always like, it never makes sense to me for these things to be $300 because that's how much a Series S costs. So it's like $200 is always the upper limit in my mind for something that is adjacent. It is a companion. It is not a thing that is itself. So there's always been the price barriers. But the thing for the Series S, the Series controllers that you mentioned having a direct connection to the cloud, I missed that entire part. I was so fixated on the gyro part that I didn't even catch that part. So that part where it's streaming the inputs to the cloud server, that's interesting. That's actually really cool.
Especially if you could just buy that controller and, you got an app on your TV, then you're all set. For $50 in your Game Pass subscription, you're all set, as long as there's not a giant long line in front of you for 114 minutes to play Starfield.
It's still faster than downloading the file itself, though. That would have been 115 minutes.
That's true. That's true. I ended up managing some of my software, and I have it installed locally now. That game came out. We never had a chance to talk about it. Go ahead, Carrie. You had a thing to say.
Yeah, so this is just about gyro, and this is just if people aren't aware, there's a new YouTuber. He just started uploading, but he's already blowing up a bit because he only plays Counter-Strike on a DualSense, and he's playing gyro only, and he's beating like pro Counter-Strike people. So like he's pretty much blowing up, but this is like a really good argument that gyro is actually better than mouse and keyboard on a controller. But the dude like has like this weird wicked grip, and like his index finger on his right hand is like for the face buttons, and it's like it's not ideal when I look at him doing it, but he is playing exceptionally well. So I think that you look at him and there's a good argument that gyro is a far better input mechanism overall, especially with an analog stick for just general movement as opposed to WASD, and just general keys otherwise, for any other type of thing that you're going to be doing, like hotkeys on a game. So anyway, check it out, look it up. It's pretty interesting to watch him play, especially when he's playing against pros and beating them.
Yeah, that's awesome. If for no other reason, I just want gyro because it gives me. I'm not going to say that I'm going to be better than people with a mouse and keyboard, but I wouldn't be as much of a scrub as I would be with just the sticks. I feel like it's just an additive thing, and people need to try it out and give it a real shot because it's really fantastic. And I think the first time I ever used it was on the Steam controller, which I think that. I love the Steam controller. Still waiting for a Steam controller 2. But speaking of sequels to things with Steam in the name, Pierre-Loup Graffi was at the Tokyo Game Show, which you mentioned earlier, Fox, and he was directly asked about what's going on with the Steam Deck, and he said, "Well, we're doing real well. We're a couple of years away from any updates to that Steam Deck," and I don't know if he's just saying, I don't know if he's saying that because, hey, you know what? We'll announce stuff when we're ready to announce stuff. But usually when that's the message, they would say, we have nothing to announce. He said, we have no plans for a couple of years. And I'm sure that, I'm not saying they're not working on anything because clearly they are. We've got that stuff leaking out of South Korea. We have all that other stuff that people are attributing to Deckard. Do you, Russ and Carrie, I haven't talked to you guys in a couple of weeks with all of this stuff going on outside of just Discord conversations. Russ, do you think that we're going to be getting a replacement before 2 years from now?
No, so there's a couple interesting notes here. Number one is that it sounded more like he said, from a hardware level, we're not going to do any upgrades. It's not going to be worth it kind of thing. So that means that maybe we would get some sort of physical refresh. So maybe a smaller Steam Deck before we get a Steam Deck 2. I'm good with that. The other thing that I thought was a really funny observation was that I saw that quote, it's going to be 2 years until the next one. And then immediately I saw people on Twitter saying, well, the first one came out, early 2022. So add 2 years, that means January 2024. And I'm like, that's not what he's saying. But the amount of hopium and just people trying to figure out how it will match into what they want to hear, you know what I mean, was pretty funny. And so, yeah, I think it's still going to be a couple years off. And it's Valve saying it, which means that it might be an additional year after that. You know how it is with Valve is often delayed with some of their launches and whatnot. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2 years and some change, before we even hear anything about it. So, and I like that. I like the fact that they're going to keep developing with the Steam Deck in mind because I think it's awesome.
Well, Russ, you mentioned a smaller Steam Deck. Carrie, would you want a smaller Steam Deck?
Yeah, I think a lot of people want a smaller Steam Deck. A lot of people think that the Steam Deck was huge. I think if not for nothing, but I think I gained 8,000 Twitter followers from when I had the Steam Deck initially, and I just said Vita for life. And I just took a picture of it with the Steam Deck and the PS Vita. That was the only picture I sent. And then I gained 8,000 Twitter followers from that one picture. So I think that struck a chord with a lot of people because it was such a gigantic difference when you compare a PS Vita to the Steam Deck. There are still people that are firmly of the belief that the Steam Deck is not a handheld just because of how large it is. There are just some people that a handheld is a 3DS, a handheld is a PSP. And that's fine if that's what they think. And I won't disagree with them or try to change their mind on it. But yeah, I think that if Valve really wants to consider and embrace PC gaming's greatest strengths is its diversity of what types of hardware it can have. And like we have all these other companies out there, and like the GPD Win Mini that's out there. I still feel like hopefully when I get the plastic mold reshell that fixes the heat problem on it. But for me, the GPD Win Mini is, if you think about it from size, it can fit in your pocket. I usually put it in my back pocket. It has a 7-inch screen, so it's 16 by 9 instead of 16 by 10. So effectively, it is the same size screen because a lot of Steam Deck games are going to run in 16 by 9 instead of 16 by 10 because a lot of them have those borders. So effectively, you have right around the same size screen, but something that is way, way smaller. I think personally that would be good. But I think, getting something like a better display would really be something that a lot of PC gaming people would want. Yeah, so I think that would be ideal, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. And the only reason I say that is because Gabe, I think, has a lot of influence in like the ultimate decision of where these things go, and he has been someone that has been like a min maxer. Even like from a long time ago, if you ever seen him like play World of Warcraft, the old screenshots of him, he's playing like on a 42-inch plasma, like 2 feet away. He's just playing on that. So it's like he's always been someone who appreciates something like larger things. So when I take a look at the Steam Deck, I'm like, oh yeah, this definitely has Gabe's approval on it. So it's just from a comfort point of view, and I think that's the balance that they need to try to get, is trying to make sure that ergonomics are the first priority. And making that into smaller might be a difficult challenge.
That's the follow-up question that I was going to ask you, Russ, is do you think if they made it smaller, you would use it as much? Because it wouldn't, I cannot, like, I know Carrie's talking about the GPD Win Mini. I cannot imagine that is as comfortable to hold in your hand as a Steam Deck. Russ,
Yeah,
if it was smaller, you think it'd be more comfortable or as comfortable?
I would be amazed if they could do that, because nobody else has, like the Steam Deck is still the most comfortable handheld, and a lot of that has to do with the size. And so if they can knock that out and figure it out, I mean, obviously they spent a lot of time designing that Steam Deck. We saw all of those prototypes that they like went through and whatnot. So if they're doing that again with something smaller and they can pull it off, I would love it. But yeah, I always love the idea of a smaller handheld, I should say, right? But it's always the Steam Deck I grab anyway, and so it's hard to say. There's a lot of other things that happen when you make something smaller too, heat issues and whatnot. With the Win Mini in particular, we've seen that. And so, yeah, I don't know. They got an uphill battle to climb, or uphill road to take. The thing is that I wonder what all the other companies who use the fact that they have a smaller device than the Steam Deck as their main like selling point, what are they going to do? You know what I mean? Like, hey, we've got the, Aya Neo Air or whatever. I'm like, well, now you don't have that one. So what is it going to be? And so, yeah, I'm really interested to see how that moves the whole trajectory if they do release something like that.
If they shrink it down, Carrie, do you think they shrink the screen too? Or they like we saw all the prototypes that Russ was just talking about, they said, make it too small, you can't read anything. You make it too big, it's too heavy. If they make the Steam Deck smaller, they got to keep the 7-inch screen, I think, right?
They have to. I think that they're wedded to that as a minimum, personally myself. I also think that they're wedded to 16 by 10. It's a wise choice that they did because they're aiming at 800p. For me, this has always been a thing that I've always witnessed on the Windows side of things when we were looking at, like the Win 1 and Win 2 were 720p screens. And that often introduced issues because Windows by default, a lot of Windows would be the minimum size, which is 768. So you would have Windows that would like be below the fold of what your screen was, so you couldn't even click OK and cancel. They get around it because GameScope will smush whatever screen or stretch it however they need to, and that's one of GameScope's like strengths. So they can get around that. However, personally, I believe that they chose 800p so that they would not have to shrink and deform text or whatever. Because if you have to shrink 768 down to like 720, if they were to go like 16 by 9, right? That is an overall worse result, and they're better off just slightly expanding it or leaving it the same. So having 800p as a minimum and 7 inches, I think, are like things that they've already determined, and something that we've already seen from previous handhelds, that this is basically a requirement. You need to have something that is 800p effectively or more to just run Windows stuff. And because SteamOS and Proton is going to be piggybacking on a lot of things that are legacy from Windows, that they're going to inherit those qualities. So they need to have a platform, a foundation that can display that correctly. So yes, ultimately to answer your question, I think that they've already done all that, and I do think that 7-inch 800p would be the minimum baseline that they would target. It just already has huge board bezels, so they would just have to shrink that up and gain whatever they can gain from that. Maybe it'd be a tiny bit smaller while still having the same stuff. Ideally, they go to OLED or something and tighten it up a bit. That would also be worthwhile. But like how Russ said, I'm often picking up the Steam Deck just because it just, I don't know, perhaps it just feels very console-like to me. And I just press the little power button and it just wakes up and I'm going in and it just has I don't even go into the desktop side of SteamOS. I really don't. I just always use the Steam Deck client side of it, and it just feels so good. And I've been running SteamOS 3.5 for so long, and that's been amazing. So I've just been super happy on that end, and I use it from that perspective. You know what's funny is I actually do it like docked as well. I'll dock it and I'll just enjoy playing in a docked experience. So yeah, I am not of the belief that they're going to do it in any way. But also going back, Bill, we actually touched on this subject, I think like a few months after the Steam Deck came out, talking about whatever the Steam Deck 2 would come out. And even then we were like, it's not going to happen. Like even from a hardware perspective, it wasn't going to happen. But yeah, what they're saying makes a lot of sense.
If they shrank it down, like I'm looking at this, they got to get rid of something. They can't, I mean, sure, they might be able to shrink it just by bezels. But when you look at the Steam Deck, like it has all these different inputs, and I don't see them getting rid of any of these inputs. And sure, somebody might say, well, if you make it a little less wide, then these trackpads move out to the edge. But then they're hard to hit with your thumb. So I don't know that they can really get any smaller than this in a candy bar design. Like they would have to go with a clamshell design, which would make Kerry incredibly happy, and he would be, you know, screaming from the rooftops, "I told you that clamshell was superior."
It's the truth.
I agree with you that clamshell is superior, but I don't know if it's as comfortable. Anyway, I don't know that they can shrink this down and actually sell a smaller version. But you know what? What do I know? I don't know. I don't know how to design this stuff. So who knows? Now, a second ago, Carrie, you mentioned SteamOS 3.5. You've been on it for a while. One of the things that came out when SteamOS 3.5 moved to the beta channel was that there was basically Valve was giving us a way to undervolt like different voltage values. Now, Rich and I, we did the show because you guys were all busy, and Rich and I are both like, we're not super tinkerers when it comes to that stuff. I updated to SteamOS 3.5. I booted into the firmware. I went looking around. I said, I don't know what any of this means, so I left. Why are you so excited about these varied voltages?
Yeah. Okay, so I can jump in real quick. This is actually super huge. What's funny is I actually asked Valve this a year ago or whatever. I was like, could you guys actually officially support undervolting? And nothing. I heard nothing back, and I was like, oh, shouldn't ask that question. And then I see this, and I'm like, what the hell? Well, anyway, I'm sure my question didn't get to this, but the point of why undervolting is so important is that we call this thing the silicon lottery. Insofar as that when silicon is developed, when they're actually making these things, they are doping the silicon with other materials to make it semiconductor, right? A semiconductor. That doping layer is kind of random. And what happens is that when you create these dies, you will have different chips that may not be good at all, are good, but then they have different voltages that require to hit different frequencies.
Can I interrupt just for a second? Because I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. So I have a Steam Deck and you have a Steam Deck. Undervolting might work okay for you, but not work okay for me? Is that what you mean by lottery?
Yes, correct.
Okay, continue.
So what they do is they create a default voltage that is across everyone's machine. So effectively, because we are pushing this much pressure, if voltage is pressure, right? Normally you would think about this as a river. One analogy that I like to give, there's a few different analogies that we like to give because there's different ways that we can apply voltage to a chip. And I'll get to that in a moment. But when you create a default voltage to hit a certain clock to say, okay, our weakest chip out of this bin needs this much voltage to hit this clock. Okay, we need to make this voltage. Your weakest link becomes the default voltage, basically. So now everyone is carrying the weight of this despite the fact that they don't need to. So not everyone is going to be able to undervolt their chip better as best as possible. Like if someone's able to get like negative 50 millivolt, not everyone is going to be able to do that. In fact, when I first started looking into this a long time ago, on both of my Steam Decks, I was only able to get like negative 10 millivolt after my testing. So I was just like, well, this doesn't seem like it's all that worth it. They're probably doing something. And it does seem like under 1 gigahertz, they actually are tuning voltage a bit, which goes along with one of the reasons why Steam Deck is so performant at lower TDPs, but that's a separate thing altogether. However, as an analogy, there are two different ways. You can do static undervolting and you can do adaptive undervolting. Adaptive undervolting is easily the easiest method, because what you are saying is adaptive is basically like haggling. Imagine if you go up to someone and say, how much does that cost? And they say default voltage is whatever, 1 volt, right? 0.9 volt. And you go, I'm going to give you 0.8 volt. And he goes, 0.85 volt. And you go, okay. And then you say, okay, I'm paying you 0.85 volt for this frequency. Wait, you're doing this millions of times a second, right? Yeah. You're doing this all the time. So when you're doing that, if you were to imagine a super soaker, right? I don't know if everyone is understanding like a water gun, right? When you're pumping a water gun, if you needed to pump twice to reach 10 meters, right? But if you could just pump once to reach 1 meter, and imagine doing this a million times, right? Instead of pumping twice for everyone, now you're only pumping once. Imagine that all of that energy savings to reach that same clock frequency is now less. So not only are you spending less energy, a byproduct is that there is less heat. People often assume that undervolting performance gains are because of a heat reduction. That is a byproduct. That is not the reason why we're actually getting better performance. What we're actually doing inside of a given TDP scope, 15 watt. When we say 15 watt TDP, when we undervolt, that means that we can still spend 15 watts, but we're getting more bang for our dollar because we got the guy haggling for how much we're spending on voltage and clock frequencies. So when you're doing this millions of times a second, what you're doing is you are effectively reaching the same clocks and spending less power doing so, a byproduct of which is less heat, but you can also now hit boost clocks far more frequently. Maybe at this, with undervolting, we can hit 3.5 gigahertz all the time on CPU and hit 1.6 gigahertz on GPU more frequently. Effectively, at that 15 watt TDP, you are hitting something that's like 18 watt TDP, but inside of a 15 watt TDP scope. So this is the benefit of it, is that you are achieving more with less. It's haggling. That's all it comes down to. It's very, very powerful. The reason why this largely left us is because some security dunce was like, hey, if we undervolt things, I can get into your security and I can get your chips. And everyone was like, oh, plundervolt. So all of that stuff went away. And this security researcher, I want to like thump on the head. It's like, you took away our performance. But yeah, that's largely the reason why we haven't seen it a lot. It got locked up in Intel's Tiger Lake when it was available in Intel Ice Lake, but this is around the time of Plundervolt. So this is the main reason why undervolting is so huge, is that we are getting more for less. And inside of a given TDP constraint, which we all fight in a handheld, this gives us more for less, or more for the same that we've already been spending. So this is the benefit of it.
So, okay, there's a lot of mixed metaphors there. Russ, you if you're gonna haggle or drive down the street with your super soaker squirting people every 15 meters, whatever it is that you're doing, are you going to be undervolting your Steam Deck, or are you going to leave it as default? Because what Carrie can do and what like I can do and what you can do, it seems like it depends on whether or not we won that lottery or not. So what are you going to do?
So the big thing for me, I heard all what Carrie's saying. I'm like, that sounds so awesome for someone else to do. And so so that's my question for three 3.5 is like, is that an automated thing that someone is doing the haggling for me, or do I have to go and do it myself? Because if not, I'm probably just going to be happy with what I have.
So it seems like it's BIOS only. On Intel side, we were able to. Intel calls it Fiverr, FIVR, and I forget the acronym of what it actually stands for, but it's what was the part that was controlling it. We could actually handle this in software, and that was beneficial because we could actually automate the process of finding out what our maximum undervolt is given a different API. The problem with undervolting is multiple, and giving this to just regular people, I think, is great, but like you were saying, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they're not properly testing. With undervolting, especially on Windows side, you like for instance on the GP2Win 2, if I were to undervolt by 80 millivolt, I could run that for hours on something with DirectX 11. But I put something on with OpenGL, instantly crash. I put something on with DX12, instantly crash. So now I have to, not only do I have to test for my undervolting stability on one API, I have to test across multiple APIs in multiple games. If you just do it on a single thing, you're going to find yourself having a bad time. Now, if you do something where you test and you're like, oh, everything was fine, and then you play another game and you start seeing crashing, you go, well, what the hell is happening? It's because you didn't test it well enough. So this is the part where things can get very tricky with undervolting, in that you have to test a lot to make sure that your stability testing for undervolting is generous across the board and across a lot of different use cases.
So, I mean, you look at the Steam Deck. I go on the internet. I go on YouTube. I find a tutorial for how to undervolt your Steam Deck. I follow that tutorial and go into the BIOS. But I mean, they don't know what kind of games I'm going to play, and it seems like it's an all or nothing thing. This doesn't is here. I guess my question is, right now, you got to go into the BIOS and make the switch, which I went into the BIOS, couldn't find it, gave up, and walked away. But you go into let's say I figure it out. I go into the BIOS, I make the switch. It's all or nothing, right? I don't get to say, well, let's undervolt when I play, Celeste, and when I play Final Fantasy 14, I'm not going to undervolt. Like, you can't do that, right?
Yeah, and you don't want to either. You really don't want to. You want to basically find your maximum undervolt and always have it out there. And the reason I say that you always want to have it on there is because there is no situation ever in the history of ever where not undervolting is a better outcome. If you're just talking about like stability, don't worry about that. Undervolting is not going to damage your system. You're actually pushing less voltage into the system. It's less hurtful to the system with what you're doing. The only thing that you're going to come across, and this is why I go to the Super Soaker analogy, because if you do one pump and you try to hit a frequency that's 10 meters away, and you pump once, and in this game it only goes 9 meters. 9 meters means it crashes. So things crash when you don't hit the target. So this is the bad part of undervolting and what I'm trying to get across. And that's why you have like a default voltage. You always pump twice to hit 100 meters, 10 meters, because that's what it is. Even though you'll go further than that. The problem is that you have to test for the use cases where you're going to not hit that target, and the end result being the shop is going to close. The thing's going to close down. Much like the haggling thing is like, hey, I'll give you 0.8 volts. And then instead of saying 0.85 volt, he just closes the door and shuts it out. Right. And that's the problem with undervolting. These two analogies that I'm trying to give to you to kind of try to understand of like the consequence of not hitting the target with a given frequency that you're trying to hit is a crash. This typically is not going to result in anything bad happening. The worst case scenario that's going to happen here is corruption on your disk, which you could then just overwrite everything. That is typically like the worst case scenario in these situations with undervolting. So it's not terrible, but it can be inconvenient, and the testing procedure, especially if you have to jump back into the BIOS to test every one of them, is inconvenient. When I tested it, I only got negative 10 volt after all of my testing. Like I was doing negative 30 in some tests, but then on some other things it was failing. So I was kept on lowering 5 millivolts at a time. And then I got down to 10 millivolts, and I'm like, this is not like, I'm not going to make a video with my two Steam Decks like this. Like this is not even worth it. And especially with all the part of using smokeless at the time and all the other stuff, I was like, I'm not going to even make this video because this is going to be making a video that's going to get me into like a weird place that I have to support this for a long time. And I'm just like, I'm not going to touch this goddamn thing. But we knew about it fairly early on. I want to say like a month after the Steam Deck came out, people were already doing it. If you went on the Steam Deck Discord, people were doing it. So
right, and Kyle has a video about how to do it.
Yeah. So it's been known for a while. and it's been something that super users I think should do. It's very beneficial if you have a Steam Deck that can get pushed forward. My two Steam Decks don't. I am ultimately I am very, very happy with the decision that Valve made, that they're including this in the BIOS. I have not updated my Steam Deck yet, so I heard it's on 1.16, but people are having problems finding it. So I have to go look for it myself. But having official means of it is huge. That's fantastic. That is another feather in the cap for the Steam Deck, insofar as any of these other things that are out there, and it's embracing what PC gaming is.
All right. Well, that's PC gaming. Russ, you were looking at the show notes and you said, I think I want to talk about this phone thing. So why don't you take it away, man? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so iPhone 15 is coming out, or is out for some people. I got a couple weeks for my delivery, but one of the things that they showed off in their like keynote or announcement was it playing like AAA style games like Resident Evil, and it's interesting too because they have the USB-C out as well. They've moved away from Lightning, and so it's going to make it a lot easier to use a USB adapter to be able to plug into a monitor or whatever, and kind of turn it into a gaming console. And I'm interested in just hearing your guys' take of whether or not that is ever going to take off. Is anybody going to pay $30 or $40, $50 for a game to have on the App Store to be able to play these? It always seems like, even on the Android system, they've tried this a few times, putting out some sort of tentpole release, and nobody will buy it because it's just so much more expensive than Flappy Bird or whatever else other option they have.
Yeah, when the App Store first came out, like, games were more expensive. When they first came out, it was like $8 for a game, and then they had the race to the bottom. Everybody was trying to undercut each other, and now you just can't sell a game that costs a lot of money. I'm saying a lot of money for a $30 game. All right, you can't sell a game that is priced like most games are on iOS or Android because they've found, well, you know what? I can just play, like you said, Flappy Bird or Coffee Golf or any number of these games that are either free or cost $1 or come with Apple Arcade. So I don't think that that's going to work very well. I think that what Apple and companies like Capcom need to do is they need to partner up and say, all right, well, let's get Resident Evil 4 remake, which is coming to iOS. Yeah. Let's get that in Apple Arcade as part of the subscription thing so that people will try it, because people aren't willing to spend $30 to try something, especially like, are you going to play it with touchscreen? I'm not going to play it with touchscreen.
Right.
Carrie, are you going to play these games with touchscreen?
Nope.
He won't even answer. He just shakes his head. No, he says. Carrie, what do you think about this? Are you even a little interested?
I'm not. All right, so I'm not an Apple fan at all. I don't own any Apple things, and you guys, I like whatever. I think that the chip that they've made is very, very good, but the A17,
A17 Pro, I think is what they call it.
It's for what they've made. It is very good, and they deserve credit for there. And I will always credit for the stuff that they've been doing. However, they have entered into a realm that Intel has found themselves in from like 2014, is that they are just pushing frequencies, and TSMC's N3 node doesn't look like it's all that great. Or yields, I'm trying to like read up on and try to read through the tea leaves there. It is a very performant chip, and they did a really good job there. However, some of the articles that I've read indicate that the chip can consume 25 watts, and on a phone that is outrageous.
Especially something this thin, like that's gonna get hot
with no vapor chamber or whatever either.
Yeah, so I don't anticipate, like, how is that going to work with thermal throttling, because it will thermal throttle. And what would be the top end TDP on that thing? Maybe it's like 10 watt or so. Can it still run those things? Yeah, I think it can. I think they're going to have a better time if they could buy once and have a overall support on like MacBooks, Mac Studio, Apple, if they could figure out that angle. But they need to make a gaming phone. I've been talking about, like, you like check my receipts on like Twitter and stuff. I've made fun of touch gaming. I'm like, who wants to play a game when your thumbs are covering up like 40% of the screen? How could you possibly play anything like that? And a lot of the games that we play on phones have adapted around that. There are games that are asynchronous. You're like looking at what's going on, and maybe you're like playing golf or something. So you'll take the ball and you slide it back, and you'll kind of like look around, and you have time to make a choice. But anything that is like very, very interactive, you're going to find yourself having a bad time. Now, I've seen kids play like Fortnite and stuff, and they're like whipping their fingers around on a touchscreen and stuff. And that's really cool to see an 8-year-old really like whipping a touchscreen around. But I think a large portion of us aren't going to entertain that at all. So I've been asking for a gaming phone forever. I ask every company for a gaming phone. They never make it. Apple's not going to make it because Apple doesn't really like gaming. They like the money, but they will never want to align themselves with gaming as an image. For them, it's beneath them.
I don't know that I agree with that. Like, you look at the Apple TV. Like with Apple Arcade, they have plenty of games on there, and like they brought out Miyamoto to introduce like Super Mario Run on the iPhone. I don't think that they think it's beneath them, and a lot of people also say, Apple doesn't want gaming. Apple has like the biggest gaming store there is. It's just most of us ignore it because we don't want to do that stupid thing with our thumbs, and it's not comfortable to play a game like that. And I'm with you there. I just don't think that Apple's like thumbing their nose at gaming.
I would submit that if Apple wanted to, they could demolish Nintendo. That they could demolish a lot of these companies. They choose not to. And that is like, let's go back to like when Steam came on Mac, right? They were like, Steam is on Mac, and they spent 12 seconds talking about it, and then they spent like 4 minutes talking about some Adobe thing. And I was like, what the hell, guys? That's a huge announcement. You just kind of like went, hey, yes, Steam's on Mac. Anyway, it was like, geez. And yeah, so for me, I think the proof is that if Apple actually wanted to align themselves with gaming, they would embrace it more, and they would demolish everybody. They could, at any given moment, just choose to enter the gaming industry outside of what they're already doing, but they don't. If they made a gaming phone, like a legitimate, like slide up, actual controls where these games could be playable, I think you would find a place where people would start entertaining that idea, where they actually find a way that they actually enjoy playing it. As it is right now, plugging in a USB-C cable to an external monitor and then using a wireless controller, I don't think they're going to find themselves winning anywhere because people already have that, and they're called consoles, and they already enjoy playing on them. So that's an uphill battle that they're going to find themselves. I do agree with you that they have a humongous gaming presence, but thankfully that they don't do anything, because I wouldn't want to be on Apple's platform. If they came out with an Apple gaming phone, I'd be like, I gotta buy a gaming iPhone now. That is something that I would just have to accept.
Yeah. Well, leave Apple out of it. Are you interested in playing games on a touchscreen, though? Even if it's
Never.
not Apple? No. Okay,
Nope.
That's what I thought.
Russ,
are you going to be buying an Apple TV if it has what's the chip? A17?
A17 Pro.
A17 Pro? Are you going to buy an Apple TV that has that? Because, that's pretty compelling, and you don't have to worry about the heat issues or the battery issues or any of that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't see the phone kind of gaming like prospect working for me out at all. Like even plugging into an external monitor, using a controller, all that stuff. You're right, Fox, and it's just too many layers, I think, and just barriers to entry. Apple TV, maybe, the ecosystem is so tied down. That's the big issue. I know there's things with the European Union that are going to maybe open some of these side loading options up, and so that might actually give us some room to work with. And then the other part is going to be Mac gaming, right? Like I think that's probably the one where there's a lot of potential there. I did an emulation video on Mac not too long ago, and I was really surprised at how well everything worked. And I know that the EmuDeck team is working on something as well to kind of synchronize all that together. And so, yeah, I can see it on Mac way more than on like Apple TV or even on the phone. Yeah.
And the chips that are in the Macs are bananas fast. Like they are
Right.
really, really good. Like I made a video. I had this camera recording at 4K 24, a top-down camera recording at 4K 24. I threw both of those in Final Cut Pro. I didn't even bother closing all of my other stuff, and I could just scrub through this stuff with no problem, which for people who don't do video editing, that's impressive. You know?
Yeah.
I could just scrub through anything. These are really performant chips. I remember Baldur's Gate 3 just got updated for Mac, and it's supposed to like run now because when it first came out, it would not launch. I need to load that up on my Mac and see how it performs on the M2 Mac. But a lot of times, it does not perform well because it's just not optimized for this hardware. You know, because like it's an afterthought most of the time. And one of the things, Carrie, that you're like, why didn't Apple? They only spent 12 minutes talking about, or 12 seconds talking about Steam. I'll tell you why. Because they don't want you to buy any games on Steam. They want you to buy them from their friggin' app store.
That's a good point.
And that's one of the reasons why they didn't pay any attention to Steam, because they're like, all right, some people are going to care about this, but we want you to buy our games on the app store because we can take 30% of that instead of Valve taking 30% of that. We get nothing. So I'm very curious what everybody else thinks. Do you play games on your phones? Let us know in the comments down below. Any other topics that you guys want to hit before we get out of here?
There's one thing I want to talk about. The thing that Jerry Rig Everything does. I guess on Box Therapy, like he became super famous because he tried to taco a phone.
Right. That's the guy that bent the phone?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
As a general thing, I don't like iPhones, right? I am against people trying to taco phones as a measure of durability. When I see people just like really struggling, like, oh, look at that, I tacoed it. And I go, all right, well, you tried real hard to do it.
Right.
I don't know what this proves. But apparently, like, other phones resisted different amounts of that. So that's compelling in one way or another. This is just something I want to talk about as it relates to iPhones and tacoing phones as a thing. I'm not sure that iPhone, especially like the 15, the titanium one, deserves the whatever that they're getting. Like, oh, it's not as durable. I think the phone's plenty durable. Well, insofar as what everyone decided was premium, right? This is a whole other topic that we need to talk about outside of that. But I think it's undue criticism towards the titanium whatever.
Yeah, well, I can understand, like, if you were worried about it, you having it in your back pocket. First off, why are you putting it in your back pocket? Are you a barbarian? Put it in your front pocket, people. But secondly, that's not a scientific test. He's just testing it with his hands. You got to have, like, a machine that always does it exactly the same amount.
Yeah,
and this one used this much force in order to taco. I've never heard that phrase, to taco the phone.
Well, I mean, they just look at him, right? Like, what are you attempting to do here? It's a slate. Why are you trying to bend it in half
Right.
with
It's a very natural use case right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, guys, we can make a lot of money if we make a YouTube channel where we start folding all of your handhelds in half.
Yeah.
YouTube.com/tacophone.
Yeah, that's it.
No, not phone. Like your handhelds. Like we gotta fold the Steam Deck in half.
Yeah.
All right.
That's it.
All that stuff.
How many taco units does it take? Oh, this is four taco units.
4 taco units. Real quick before we get out of here, I found this to be kind of interesting. Mortal Kombat 1 running on the Switch looks like a dumpster fire, and it costs $70. And a lot of people are like, they shouldn't be charging $70 because the graphics are that bad. But are we paying for graphics, or are we paying for the features? Because apparently, in the game, it's got the same features. It's got feature parity with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And you bought a Nintendo Switch knowing that it was not the most powerful thing when it came out 7 years ago. First off, should they have put that game out on the Switch at all? And secondly, do you feel like they should be given that shade for charging $70 for it on the Switch? Because I don't know how I feel about this. Russ?
Yeah, I think I'm on the camp where I think it's kind of dumb to expect anything beyond that. So, like, here's the way I think about it. I remember when The Witcher 3 came out and when Doom came out on the Switch, and everyone's like, look at how this is actually playing on this hardware. That's amazing. Yeah, the graphics aren't so good, but it's working, right? And now we're at this point where it's like, it's not only is it working, but it's not working well enough for me. Like, I don't know. I think you get what you pay for, like, in terms of the hardware itself that you bought, not the game. You know, it's a $70 property or whatever it happens to be. If you don't want to pay that much for a game, then wait 2 months and it'll be $60. Wait 6 months, it'll be 50 or 40. And so the way I see it is that it's a dumb argument. Even when people are showing the screenshots between them, I'm like, yeah, it's a Nintendo Switch. Like, it's pretty cool that you even got it, you know? And so, yeah, I got no qualms about that. It's like when Donkey Kong Country came out on the Game Boy, and like no one was mad that it wasn't in color. Like, you know what I mean? It's a Game Boy game, and it had all sorts of parity like features that like had been dropped down, like pared down. And so in that sense, yeah, I don't know. Like it's the hardware issue, and you paid for that hardware. That's what kind of performance you can expect. And so I don't know. I just wouldn't have bought it on that console.
Yeah,
that would have been the thing I would have done. But yeah.
Right. Carrie, do you think that the company is out for putting it out on the Nintendo Switch, or do you feel like they have no choice because there's so many Nintendo Switches out there?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what we said, even with the undervolting, that sounds like some great thing for someone else to do, right? Like the Nintendo Switch you buy because it is underclocked like crazy and has really good battery life. I mean, the newest ones has 5 hours of battery life, and it's super light, doesn't get hot, you don't hear the fan. You are paying for that experience, and you're paying for other games to be made to work inside of that scope. So, yeah, I mean, there are people that don't want to bother with configuring a game and pairing it back until it gets running. And this company, like, they made it that way to run on that. There also needs to be said that, yeah, you're paying $70 for it now. You don't have to pay $70 for it now. You can wait for it to go on sale. But there's also the very real possibility that when the Super Switch comes out, you'll be able to put that game in and download an update to run it in Super Switch mode that is going to be able to run it better. There is that possibility that could happen. So now you paid for it a while ago, but now your game has been upgraded. Much like a lot of Xbox 360 games got updated on the Xbox Series X when they went to 4K, and all those enhancements just came over, even if you already bought it. So it's kind of like the same deal there, where that's a possibility that could happen if the company does the work to enhance it. So number one, you bought it because it's easy to use and you're guaranteed that whatever game you're going to buy on there is going to work, however it's going to work. The shortcomings of the Switch being as they are, it is still amazing for what it's doing. And I never found that to be a valid argument, because when you think about it, it's taking less power than an LED light bulb. So it's impressive in any metric that you look at it, especially when you consider how old it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the better analogy I should have made was the first Mortal Kombat when it came out on home consoles. We had the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and the Game Boy versions all launched at the same time. And they were completely different games because they were limited by the hardware. They were trying to play a game, you know, the arcade game was so much better than those home console versions. But they all cost the same amount, you know, and that's just kind of how it's always been. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the NerdNest podcast. Russ, you just put out a video this morning. What is that video?
I reviewed the 8BitDo mechanical keyboard. I've just been a little bit burnt out by doing handhelds all the time because, you know, you have to remember I put 40 to 60 hours of work into every single video, and that's me pushing on buttons for a long time. And so I just needed a break. And so instead of pushing on buttons, I pushed on keyboard keys. And so that was actually a really fun video. I actually learned myself what switches mean, what, you know, caps mean, and all those different like acronyms and whatnot. So I learned all that, and then I put it all into like a 24-minute video about mechanical keyboards, and then also reviewing that one. And it's a great little keyboard. It's modeled after the NES. It's pretty cool looking.
Gary, did you pick up one of those?
No, I want to though. So I know Russ had it, but I have some friends that have it, and I saw some pictures. And I'm like, oh, I forgot to get that. And I saw how awesome it looked, and I love how it looks. But now the Nest version of it is like delayed until like mid-October or something. And I was like, oh. Of course. But yeah, that's where I am. Speaking of 8BitDo, I am going to be reviewing the arcade stick pretty soon. I got that in, but the video I'm actually working on trying to get out today is Ambernix 405V, which I've had video done for a while, but I never got around to doing it in Italy, and I was missing video anyway, so I'm just gonna like kind of finish that up, and that's the next video that I have coming. But I'm actually quite behind on a bunch of stuff.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you guys get out of here so you can get your work done. And I know that Russ has a game plan behind him, and we were going to guess it, but it occurs to me that I don't know how this video is going to come together, and I don't know if you guys will be able to see it in the background because there's 3 of us. And I don't have the ability, like the software that I'm using, it doesn't work the way that it used to, and I need to see how things work before we do that. So I'm going to hold on to that for the next time. But that does it for this episode of the NerdNest podcast. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting app, go ahead and rate it 5 stars or whatever, and head on over to the YouTube channel and hit subscribe. Also, make sure you go to youtube.com/retrogamecore and youtube.com/thefox and subscribe to their channels as well. And I guess that is going to do it for this episode. We will see you all next time. Thanks for hanging out, and take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.